More than 18,000 Palestinians have now been killed in this war. What is wrong with voting for a ceasefire in the UN?
So every loss of innocent life is, of course, a tragedy, and any of us have seen the footage, be it of the horrors that occurred on October 7, or of children and other innocent individuals in Gaza facing human suffering, bleed and feel the pain for that. But we also have to face up to the reality. Hamas is a violent terrorist organisation who deliberately targeted individuals, civilians in their attacks, did so in the most barbaric ways, and have said publicly, given the chance, they would do so again. And so the risk of voting for ceasefire or calling for ceasefire is that Hamas just uses that time to rearm, to regroup, and to repeat those horrors all over again. And the cycle of violence simply continues as a result of that. The only ceasefire that really is a sustainable one is one where Hamas releases the hostages they continue to hold illegally. These were again civilians taken hostage against their will, as well as to lay down their arms and surrender their terrorist leadership and operatives who continue to pose an ongoing threat, and a threat that will be realised if they are allowed to regroup in a way that a ceasefire without them undertaking those conditions would enable.
Yeah, you said sustainable ceasefire. That was the language that was used in the joint statement from Anthony Albanese and the leaders of New Zealand and Canada. Pretty rare to see that statement from the three leaders. That was put out just hours before the UN vote. Do you agree with the words that were used with that statement?
We didn't really quibble with the statement. It said many, many things, and in some ways probably tried to say too many things to too many different people. But we absolutely object to the way the Albanese government instructed Australia to vote at the United Nations. The UN motion that passed calling for ceasefire without even mentioning Hamas was a woefully inadequate motion, and it shows a weakness in the government's position and therefore a weakness in Australia's position.
Well, it did support an amendment, though. It did support the amendment which was then defeated. It did want Hamas and those attacks included in the resolution. That was the Australian intent. And there were 152 other countries that then voted for the final resolution. So Australia was hardly on its own in supporting it.
We may not have been on our own, but when that amendment was defeated, when we couldn't have a motion that actually successfully conveyed condemnation of Hamas, acknowledgement of the horrors, and the need for them to be removed as an ongoing terrorist threat in this region, then we should not have voted for a resolution that was absent and missing all of those key aspects. That ultimately is the weakness in the Albanese government's position and the position that they put Australia in. This is not easy. It's not easy to say that you're going to stand up and back a continuance of a war where Hamas has put innocent Palestinians on the front line as human shields, where they have dug in a tunnel network that is bigger than the New York subway system, that on some reports goes down some 6 stories underground. And that's not used for innocent Palestinians to get bomb shelter or protection during the war. It's used for Hamas fighters to be able to protect themselves and then ambush Israeli soldiers. And missiles continue to be fired. Israeli soldiers continue to die. This is not a one-sided war that is being undertaken in that regard. And ultimately that is because Hamas has entrenched itself to fight this war and is using Palestinian civilians as victims in this. And their best future is one which doesn't have Hamas, just as the best future for Israelis is one without Hamas.
Just finally, and we're running out of time, I want to ask if you then agree with the comments from Andrew Hastie, your colleague, who put on social media that basically there should be no ceasefire until the job is done. Now, what does that mean? What does that mean? Does that mean no matter the civilian toll?
Well, that means that Hamas should be disabled as a military instrument, a terrorist instrument, and a governance instrument in Gaza. And removing Hamas requires Israel to be able to continue to wage a campaign. They should wage that campaign absolutely recognising international law. But that law doesn't mean that civilians don't lose their lives. Tragically, civilians lose their lives in every single war.
But
that is
where's
where
the
this
limit,
gets hard.
Simon Birmingham?
Well, the limit is one judged under international law on the basis of the military application you're applying and how carefully you're applying that, recognising that civilian casualties can and almost always will be a part of that.
Well, given the US president, yeah, okay, sorry, carry on.
But Lisa, the point is, if a ceasefire just happens and Hamas gets the chance to rearm, regroup, they will repeat the same type of horrors, and we will be all the way back to the start again in terms of seeing massive targeting of innocent civilians, massive loss of Jewish life, and yet more conflict continuing to go on. So, yes, we do need to see the job finished. It needs to be done in as careful, a targeted a way as possible, and that is certainly part of the discussions that we have had with the Israeli government to seek to understand how the Israeli Defence Force do target and to make sure that a message around regard for international law and the need for humanitarian supplies is heard from an Australian perspective conveyed to Israel. But a simple ceasefire, a simple walking away, just gives Hamas the opportunity to repeat the horrors again and again into the future, as they have said they plan to do.